Open this hearing of the Senate Foreign Affairs, Defence and Trade References Committee's inquiry into the effectiveness of sanctions against the Russian Federation. The committee will be conducting today's hearing both in person and via video conference. I'm Senator Collins, Chair of the committee, and I'm joined by Deputy Chair Senator Ciccone.
It's been one of those days, don't worry.
It is Thursday.
It is.
Senator Ciccone and I believe Senator Shoebridge will be joining us as well as Senator McDonald. These are public proceedings being video streamed live via the Parliament's website, and a Hansard transcript is being made. I remind all witnesses that in giving evidence to the committee, they are protected by parliamentary privilege. It is unlawful for anyone to threaten or disadvantage a witness on account of evidence given to a committee, and such action may be treated by the Senate as a contempt. It is also a contempt to give false or misleading evidence. Witnesses also have a right to request to be heard in camera. I now welcome representatives from the Australian Forest Products Association and Engineered Products Association of Australia. I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses giving evidence to the Senate committees has been provided to you. For the Hansard record, will you please state your full name and the capacity in which you appear today? And we'll start with Mr Matthew.
Thanks, Chair. So, Gavin Matthew, I'm the CEO of Engineered Wood Products Association of Australasia.
Thank you.
Richard Hyatt, as Acting CEO of Australian Forest Products Association.
Tim Lesto, Policy Manager at the Australian Forest Products Association.
Thank you very much. And would anybody like to make a short opening statement today?
Yes, I have an opening statement which I will provide a condensed version and then give the full to the members.
Thank you very much.
Australia has become the dumping ground for conflict timber because our laws and compliance framework aren't strong enough, putting Australia's sixth largest manufacturing sector at risk. The Australian government imposed 35% tariffs on timber from Russia in response to the war in Ukraine. When sanctions were introduced, overnight we saw a swap in volumes from Russia to neighbouring countries just across the border from Russia, such as China and Lithuania. For China, for example, much of this contained larch, which is not grown in China and most likely from Russia. Russia has a fifth of the world's forests. Our testing has shown there is Russian timber in product from China. Timber is either incorrectly labelled or processed to become engineered wood, LVL, plywood, furniture, and avoids the 35% tariffs. On average, we rely on imports to fill around 20% of the market. However, during COVID, we found we couldn't rely on imports to fill the gap in the market, and this will increasingly become the case as the world demand peaks more often are aligning. Our domestic sovereign capacity protects Australians against fluctuations in the international market. The effect of price supply provides materials for building homes and provides secure, stable, sustainable and quality jobs in regional areas. Large surges in imports lead to job losses and mill closures in Australia, and history has shown when mills close, they are unlikely to reopen, reducing our sovereign capability. Currently, the market is at the bottom of the demand cycle. Australian manufacturers' yards are full, ready to build Australian houses. Despite this, Australian manufacturers continue to lose market share to imports that are selling product lower than the cost of production in Australia. As other countries have implemented regulatory approaches to restrict the presence of Russian timber, Australia has become more and more attractive destination market as we have not put these laws in place. There is also a question on due diligence systems which rest on third-party certification, particularly as importers may not have the resources or the capacity to conduct their own supply chain investigations. Both of the major certification bodies have explicit policies in place to ban product containing Russian material. However, a source-certain report commissioned by the Department of Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry showed that half of all imported product assessed failed claims of provenance or taxonomy. All domestic product was accurately labelled. AFPA recently visited Sydney Build, where many Chinese importers had brochures promoting large products and claiming certification despite those bodies banning Russian timber. If claims around certification are unreliable, this also brings into question whether other declarations can be trusted on biosecurity, compliance to performance standards, production and labour arrangements, treatments, chemical exposure and illegal logging. Who is checking What you will hear a lot when you talk to government agencies is that's not our job. Whose job is it? And where and how often do they check? Declared LVL imports totaled 205,000 cubic metres last year to October 2025, up 63% on the previous year, and more than double they were since the war in Ukraine started, and the vast majority of this is from China. There is increasing amount of timber being purchased and shipped directly from these Chinese mills. LVL use of structural timber directly displaces timber from our domestic mills. There is no doubt that builders are also under pressure, and I understand building is expensive and we all look for cheaper options, but Australians do not want to fund the war in Ukraine, and they do not want Australian manufacturers to go out of business or Australian jobs to be lost because of shady operations using Russian timber. Thank you.
Would you like to make an opening statement too, Mr Matthew?
Certainly, Chair. It'll be a bit shorter and a bit more concise, but what it will do is support AFBA's submission as well. So, EWPAA is Industry's Technical Association for Manufacturers of Engineered Wood Products, particularly solid timber, plywood, laminated veneer lumber, glue laminated timber, cross-laminated timber, particle board and medium density fibre board. Australia's timber manufacturing industry is hurting. Mills are closing, not to reopen. Regional jobs are being lost, and this issue is one of the reasons. Tariffs do work, but these sanctions have not worked due to circumvention by third-party countries importing timber products made from conflict timber, allowing these funds to flow back to Russia. So EWPAA is an associate member of Australian Forest Products Association and supports their submission, including urging the government to extend tariffs to all imported timber products containing Russian fibre, initiate anti-dumping actions where predatory pricing is identified, and increase Australian border compliance activity with a risk-based approach. I wanted to highlight two further points. This is a broader issue than just solid timber and LVL. Wood fibre panels, finished joinery and value-added boards are other suspect imported timber products. Recent technological advances have made species and origin identification more accurate and more cost-effective across more transformed timber products. So our sector is well placed to support Australia's climate change and housing challenges, but only if our trade and border controls support a level playing field. Thanks.
Thank you. Senator McDonald, you have the call.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good afternoon. Thank you all for your time this afternoon. If I could start with you, Mr Hyatt, I wanted to talk to you specifically about what you've raised around Russian timber laundering, is what I'm calling it. What does it look like when it's coming through China? How does the product enter Australia and avoid the 35% tariff?
Yeah, so for us, the most obvious pathway is it's not illegal to transform a product in China and then bring it into Australia. So if you take some Russian fibre, you cut it up and make it and glue it back together into LVL, it can avoid the 35% tariff and come to Australia. There is concerns that timber is being mislabelled and so forth, but this can be done completely legally, and we're not getting timber coming direct and paying the sanctions. So this is a way for them to circumvent that, and it's clearly not giving effect to the purpose of why the sanctions were put in place.
No, clearly. So the department's own testing found 50% of sampled product of imported timber couldn't verify provenance. Does that reflect what your members are seeing on the ground?
Definitely, yes. Definitely seen, and our testing has also shown that there is Russian fibre in the LVL product.
You note importers were openly offering what appears to be Russian origin lark at Sydney Build in April. How widespread is that kind of activity?
It seemed very widespread. There was numerous, probably in the order of 30 LVL producers from China. Every couple of booths there'd be more production. Some of them had brochures which outlined that they contained larch. But more disturbingly for me, this piece of timber, for example, came from a business that was offering that without any brochure, without any documentation, and they just wanted your email address and they can contact you and provide timber to you. Nobody knows what's in that timber. There was nothing to check, and nobody's checking.
I mean, you mentioned in your submission about you understand that building's expensive and Australians are looking for cheaper costs, but I think Australians would be absolutely horrified if they knew that there was no serious policing of this or lack of enforcement of imported products coming in this way, from Russia, I mean.
Yes. Yes, Gav might be able to comment on the compliance, because the compliance, as I say, one of the things that we've noticed is increasingly LVL mills in China are going direct to the builder. And then there's nobody checking that, and the builders are probably not well placed to do that compliance checking, and so it's a really concerning that that nobody is checking not only for the provenance, but whether the glue works, whether it's got formaldehyde levels which meet Australian standards. Nobody's checking.
That's outrageous. So, Mr. Matthew...
Senator, can I please just add something to that?
Sure.
So we should understand that the actual building product cost is quite small, especially for those types in say a single detached home with a timber frame. It's quite small compared to the rest of the cost as well, and cost of trades, etc. So it's. I think you're right that people would look at that and say, well, there's a small saving on a product, but we've got an issue around conflict timber, and they would make the right decision. I just wanted to put it in context around that having a small saving there is not a big saving for the cost of a house. It's quite small in that way. In terms of compliance, there is no origin labelling compliance. Regulation, basically. It is, if you produce to a product standard, you do have to brand on it, but at the moment, origin is not one of those things that needs to be branded on that product.
So, I'm sorry.
Sorry, no, just to, so in a house that might be worth $500 to $1,000 to $1 million, you might be saving in the order of hundreds of dollars by going to this cheaper Chinese product. So it's while it's expensive, we're not talking. We're losing Australian businesses for the matter of hundreds of dollars.
Well, with no guarantee of, as you say, formaldehyde levels for, whether or not it meets Australian standards. And we have standards for a good reason, don't we?
Yes.
Mr. Matthew, I wanted to ask you, what's the impact been on Australian industry, jobs and stock levels and pricing then?
So firstly, can I reflect back on the first question you asked? And industry had a look at, import data is easily available, and where it comes from is easily available as well. So as soon as the tariff was put in, we saw basically everything that was imported from timber imports from Russia and Belarus went to zero straight away. So it was a red flag for us, and should have been a red flag for government as well. So that's the first thing. In terms of this is not all imports. We're not saying that. And I'm not saying that, but it's a small proportion. But the problem with the small proportion in a market, a commodity market, if that price is lower, that price defines the price. Yes. And so a price impacts of even a small volume of this material, and over the last year and a half, 2 years, it's become a quite a large volume of material, has made some major impacts on business. So the broader market is we want to be building more houses. We know that. This product's coming in. Mills want to be produced. They're only about 80%. Most of the big sawmills are only about 80% capacity at the moment. The yards are filling up. There's been some rationalisation already, so a couple of mills have closed, likely never to reopen. Regional jobs lost. So there's a price profitability issue. there's also a business issue of closure. So it's a real, and in industry we feel that this is a moment in time that we really need to focus in on this issue, and there are other issues, but we're talking about Russian timber today. But this is an important issue to get right.
I think it's devastating to think of the communities. The world's most, renewable product is timber, and yet we're discovering that Australian industry, Australian jobs are being abandoned in favour of products from other places that don't have our high standards, whether they be building codes or environmental standards or workforce standards. So I am horrified. Can you tell me then what actions are you calling on the government to take? What's the solution?
So thank you, Senator. We've asked for four things. We'd like to extend the 35% tariff on Russian products to all products containing Russian materials, irrespective of where they're imported from. Undertake anti-dumping actions against products containing Russian materials, like they've done in the EU. Undertake proactive compliance activity to stop Russian timber products being rerouted through other countries and imported into Australia. And introduce country of origin labelling requirements for timber so consumers can make informed choice regarding what they are purchasing.
So, will the government have the capacity? I mean, I understand the anti-dumping provisions. There's the Commissioner for Anti-Dumping. There's a group stood up to do that work. What about the ability to test and ensure that there is some sort of compliance of understanding what is Russian timber coming through the back door? Has the government got that capacity to do that?
Did some testing as part of a pilot of illegal logging, which is what the report that we referred to earlier, but they don't have a system in place to have that ongoing testing, which is a really concern for us because importers know that there is nobody checking.
Well, it's a joke then, isn't it? I mean, completely no protection for Australian jobs and Australian industry, I would suggest. Wood Central suggested in their submission that as Europe tightens up, Australia risks becoming the destination market for Russian timber rerouted through third countries. Reasonable?
Well, China has really learnt. Chinese businesses have learnt what we saw when EU introduced sanctions on product going from China to the EU. The mills put a thin layer of softwood on the outside of the product so it would be reclassified and to get around the tariffs, which meant they had to introduce further dumping action to stop that as well. So they're very quick and agile, and it's very difficult for those frameworks to keep up with that.
So has Australia just become a soft target, given that the EU and the US and others have tightened up their approach?
Absolutely.
Senator, if I may add at this point, it's worth understanding that our illegal logging laws are actually very extensive. What they do not cover is conflict timber. So that means that it's not, as Mr Hyatt mentioned at the start, it's not illegal for Chinese businesses to buy Russian logs. It's not illegal for them within our system to take those logs, transform them, and then under the WTO rules, under country of origin, that becomes a Chinese product in terms of trading regime. So tariff does not apply. There is actually nothing illegal about that. Within the Illegal Logging Prohibition Act, due diligence on importers means that they should actually be capturing, as much as they can, information about where the tree was grown and harvested. So all of that information should actually be captured within our system. What we don't have is coverage of conflict timber. And so we then rely on third-party certification, which unfortunately the Source Certain report shows it can be unreliable in this space for a number of reasons. That can also is an area of potential sort of inquiry. I'd also note that Source Certain report was not made voluntarily available from the government. It was actually released under FOI. and nothing has happened in response to it either since we have it, so that we're seeing multiple problems at multiple stages. There are different ways, and you've seen this in your submissions about how this may be tackled, but fundamentally at this stage there is a problem no one's actually checking. We don't actually know how much is Russian. We can tell that it's there because our testing has shown it. It's still actually not illegal.
But, I mean, to go back to you, Mr Matthew, I mean, it's not just that it's conflict timber. We're now talking about the potential for products that would fail Australian standards. Is it a safety issue as well? Is it a non-conforming engineered products? Could they result in a problem for Australian families?
Senator, there is overlap between the issues. So if you don't have product information, you don't have monitoring and testing and checking, then there's possibility, there's the conflict timber issue, but there's also a potential issue around that product not being conforming to the standards it claims it was manufactured to. Again, I don't. This is not everything. It's a small amount of suspect products, but it's still a problem. Well, and it's a problem if those products get put into applications that are higher risk, that bear more load, or at the bottom of a 3 to 5 story building, etc. So we definitely. I was going to follow up that conversation to say that we need more information, so product technical information, and we need on this side of the border as well, so that's either at the border or the point of sale, and available to builders and certifiers and a whole bunch of different people that ask the right questions. We need testing, monitoring, testing, enforcement for high risk. So you don't have to test everything. We do it with biosecurity. We do it with other types of issues. Let's have a program like that, and then also. I think that those two things together, with the obligation to put the origin labelling as well, will form a better situation. And I'll even add in a bit of more education around consumers, around builders, around those kind of things, to make sure that the whole system works together.
Well, as a consumer, I mean, you've just lightly touched on load bearing, but I would be horrified if, I contracted a builder who hadn't been able to ascertain, because there's not adequate restrictions on imports, to understand whether or not the product that I put into my family home on a multi-storey home does meet Australian standards, and now, could risk my insurance, much less, my children, my family.
What we're saying is we definitely need to tighten that up. One thing to mitigate that risk is that we're talking about a product, and a product goes into a building system, and so there's redundancy in design and those kind of things as well. So that gives more confidence around the structure, definitely. But it's a concern, and that concern is not a new concern. That's an old concern.
Mr.
We
Hyde,
need to do better in that area.
I could see that you were wanting to demonstrate.
So this is from the bathroom in Parliament House, FSC certified. Do we know that FSC bans Russian fibre? Do we know that it doesn't have Russian fibre in it? Who's checking?
Yeah. So we could be wiping our bottoms with conflict fibre. That's a shocking thought.
Ouch. It does sound painful.
Do you want to share the call and come back to me?
Senator McDonald. Yes, on that note, Senator Ciccone, you have the call.
All right, thanks, Chair. And hello, gentlemen. Good to see you. Just interested with your first recommendation around the 35% tariff. I was hoping to ask, do you have any examples that you might be able to draw on for the committee's benefit where countries have successfully proved the use of tariffed imports in goods that have been exported by third countries, like what we are discussing at the moment with Russia?
Well, as I said earlier, the US, the UK and the EU have done a combination of different factors, and for the EU is the most recent one. They've used the dumping actions to to stop that. But as I say, for us, the illegal logging laws provide a mechanism for that information to be there, so it's a reasonably simple process to identify products that have Russian fibre or that are supposed to have Russian fibre. So it should be a reasonably simple process for us to put in place.
Sorry, Senator, just to add to that. The challenge previously has been able to identify this fibre, especially in transformed, more transformed products. But as I indicated in my opening statement, the technology has improved out of sight. And I think there's more work to be done in that area to make it more cost effective and applicable across a more range of transformed products. But saying that we can't identify it isn't an excuse.
It sounds like we can identify it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it probably is being identified. Clearly, you've brought something in that shows it is probably mixed in that block. But from your experience, how has the timber generally been checked through our customs when they've been imported?
So again, for us, the legal logging requires paperwork, and then there is an audit on the paperwork, but that relies on the governance of the country that the product is coming from being...
So explain to me, so timber comes into country, there is paperwork that's been certified from the said country?
Yeah, that it's supposed to meet the rules from that country?
Yep.
Yeah, so under the Illegal Logging Act, what an importer has to do is assure themselves through due diligence process of a range of things, including where the timber came from, all of these processes, and they need to have information systems in place that then captures that information. The minister they make a customs declaration that says that this is how they do it.
This is the importer.
This is the importer. That's right. What is not happening here is a regular and systematised approach to actually check whether the product that is in the container actually matches the paperwork. And this is what the Source Certain report showed us, that 50% of imported product does not match its paperwork that they tested.
So how's it generally been described? Like, are we talking like slabs of timber? Like, is it up to the importer or the exporter how it's described?
Under the Act, there is an extensive list of regulated items, and I personally have not been involved in importing timber, so I'm not familiar with that particular process. But importers, as I understand it, go through and they say, well, we're bringing in this timber, it hits this code, it comes from these places, we're making our declaration as opposed to its product claims, its taxonomy, its provenance.
Okay, but so, I mean, if I'm the customs officer, I'm looking at this saying, well, this matches the paperwork.
Yes.
So what do we need to do to change that? I mean, it sounds to me the importer ultimately has a responsibility to make sure that the exporter is telling them honestly what is being sent across our shores.
Yes, under the Act, it is the importer's responsibility to make sure that they have complied with our laws, because they're the Australian entity, around how that actually works. As we mentioned, for conflict timber, you actually could legally say, this is timber harvested in Russia, processed in China, that is not illegal and the tariff will not apply because that is not captured under the Illegal Logging Act.
Okay. So to extend tariffs then, I mean, to all products that contain Russian material, I mean, how would Australia then be required, or how would we get support from other nations to tackle this? Because this is not something that I think we can do on our own. I think this has to be a bit of a global effort with countries like you've identified earlier.
Yeah, well, the issue is that other countries have acted and we've become a target because we're the easiest route to and we can join with other countries to make those changes, but our industry will lose a significant amount of skin or employees and businesses in that process.
I mean, you mentioned earlier, Richard, that no one is checking, and I just wanted to understand, when you say no one is checking, what do you mean by that?
Well, no one is checking that the paperwork matches the... So we did this pilot where we had 50% of product was non-conforming, but there is no testing program in place other than the paperwork and an order of the paperwork. And as you know, supply chains are complex. Products come from different places. It might change hands any number of times before it reaches the mill, then before it reaches Australia, and before it reaches the builder. So having an assurance, importers will be busy, builders will be busy, how much time they spend checking that paperwork and following it down the supply chain to all the different parts of the supply chain that they actually are what they say they are. That's why we think a risk-based testing program would really support the illegal logging and ensure that we're getting the products that we say we're getting.
Yes, and the Act does understand that Australian businesses may be constrained about how far back up their supply chain they can go. So some of our major importers are undoubtedly doing a lot of due diligence work and able to reach into their supply chains. We're really talking about a segment of the market that essentially is buying product of Facebook Marketplace, and which undoubtedly has a much higher risk, but it does not seem to generate a higher response.
It's probably a conversation that involves a bit more time, but I mean, in terms of the whole supply chain, at what point who has a responsibility or a duty to make sure that what you're saying, the timber needs to be checked? I'm assuming we have to either drill the bit, take it away to a laboratory for testing. The builder should also have some responsibility. I mean, are there state authorities that also that implement building codes need to make sure that the timber that is being used by the builder is also up to code, up to standard? Yeah, so surely there's a whole chain
the
here.
building commissions, Senator, that's the building commissions in each of the states have got that enforcement requirement around, but that's around compliance to code, to not only code but the standards that they manufactured to. So that's a requirement. They're under-resourced. I'll be honest. They're under-resourced, and they don't do a lot of it, and they rely on people's making reports, etc., to do so. Probably the most activity is in Queensland through the QBCC in terms of that, but that's their role. So it's a state-based role for that. The thing that we're talking about, so the department will probably tell you later on today that they do a check. Sorry, just really quickly. So they do a check of paperwork under the legal logging on a risk basis, and they do it for processes, domestic processes as well. What they don't check is the origin, and they don't do those tests we talked about grabbing a sample and checking what the origin was. So that's so there's a framework there. It's just that extension to a testing program.
If I may, I think your description also actually demonstrates in some way what the challenge is here, because the Department of Ag has responsibility for biosecurity and illegal logging. Border Force has responsibility for customs. Building regulations have responsibility there at state level. So it is a question, who should actually be checking? Who has that responsibility? Where does it come through? This seems to be an issue in a way that is a bit falling through the cracks, pardon the pun, that where does that responsibility land? And unfortunately, at this stage, the outcome could be and is a diminished capacity for our timber manufacturing.
I guess what your proposal is a tariff, but I think it's a bit more. I think it's probably a bit more complicated than just slapping a tariff. Anyway, I think I'm happy to move the call. I know the other senators have questions, but just the last one I wanted to ask. I mean, are there any specific proactive compliance activities that governments, both federal and state, can look at to assist? Other than what we've just sort of mentioned just then.
Well, as I say, for me, it is what it is, a simple risk-based testing program at the border, which brings in the state organisation, because that's the easiest place to capture it at the border. And then if you bring in the building, the state regulation through that, it's much easier that that's picked up at the border. We think that is the simplest place. And the reason why we're saying the 35%, because we're just trying to give effect to what the government has put in place. I mean, a ban would be great, but the government's it's shown that we're not getting timber from Russia because the 35% tariff is having the impact. So we're just trying to put in a process that delivers that tariff to where the product is going.
Well, probably more need to support our local industry as well, as you know.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
Big support of our local timber industry. Anyway, Chair, call's yours.
Thank you very much. I'll pass the call to Senator Goodell.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I'm in and out because we've got other duties on. One of the things I'm really concerned about, if I'm an engineer and I'm looking at an LVL, a CLT or whatever it is, I'm going to engineer it with the timbers I know I can get, not conflict timber. If a builder then goes and gets a, online timber lot, who warrants that the building and the timber structure is the same as what was done by the engineer if the paperwork is wrong about what's coming in?
It's Senator. That's a complex area. Certifies the bodies.
So they should be checking too.
They should be checking, but there is an issue around substitution of products from design to built in practice. So it's a problematic area. But certifiers are the ones that basically say that was the design. This is how it was built.
Tick the box.
And of course, timber framing is often behind the wall, so not so easy to check.
And that's my real concern is things are structurally built signed off by engineers. We do this. They wouldn't be considering a lot of the larches or birches because they are conflict timber and not meant to be here. So we could be having structures built that are not to spec simply because someone went on eBay or Alibaba or something like that rather than going to a local supplier or getting it even from foreign from a properly documented source, couldn't we?
Absolutely.
When we go down this pathway and we're looking at, I understand your 35% tariff, that would be for all woods declared as having Russian components, would it?
Yes. Obviously I represent members that support timber framing for construction, and that's our primary focus, but I certainly know that its impacts across the systems into furniture and other products
Panels,
as well.
Kitchens, flat pack kitchens, bathrooms, all the cupboards.
I wasn't here at the beginning. I apologise to my committee members and you. Do you have a value estimation of how much Russian timber is coming in? I know EU put it about $1.5 billion in their industry. Do we have an estimate?
I could take that on notice and get an actual number. We understand our estimate is around about 100,000 cubic metres, potentially including Russian timber, and that is around about 6% of imports.
Right. 6%, was it?
6%.
Yep. Okay. With your testing that we did, where we found a 50% contained some, was that destructive at all? Timber could be used or only a small places? Was it drilling? How does that take out?
So that was done by the department, but
Yep.
you're best placed.
You don't have to destroy the whole beam.
Yep.
You can take a smaller sample to do that. So we're talking, depending on the type of science, you're talking about putting something under the microscope.
Yep.
And then putting it in a machine that either does DNA analysis or isotope trace element analysis. So the bits don't have to be big compared to say structural property testing, where you have to have more of the beam to actually break it.
So it wouldn't be hard,
in a machine.
It wouldn't be hard to allocate risk to certain exporters and/or importers, would it?
No. It should be reasonably straightforward. As I say, we do it in biosecurity. We do it across a lot of our systems. So it's not. It's a common approach used by government.
So we're practically saying just put a greater magnifier on known wrongdoers or new players and let those with good track records a little less scrutiny. Is that all we're saying?
Yes, and when we're checking, we know we're going to get less non-compliance because people know they can get caught.
Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Senator McDonald.
Oh, thank you. Just going back to this idea of third country loopholes, in timber imports, is it effectively the same problem that the committee's examining with Russian oil refined through third countries, Russian origin but non-Russian label?
Well, the big problem for us is that it's legal to do it. I'm not sure whether I can't comment on the legality of the Russian oil circumvention, but for us, our biggest problem is that you can legally bring it into the country after it's been chopped up and glued back together in another country and avoid the tariff.
So, testing, just going back to this testing idea, I've just jumped ahead of my mind. Testing systems such as World Forest ID and Source Certain are available. Are they mature enough to be used at the border?
Absolutely, and they were used by the government to test that the process works, and that has been demonstrated that it does work. So yes, absolutely.
Okay, so that was the conversation you just had with Senator Cadell about using a randomised testing of high risk. Yes. Imports.
Just to add a little bit more, it's more difficult if the product is more transformed. So some board products are very small fibres, so it becomes a lot harder to do so. So solid timber LVL is probably the easiest of the lot, and then plywood, and then you go through the board. It's not to say it's not impossible to do, but I think there's a piece of work around making those. Identifying the best, making them more and more cost effective as well, and also applying them to more and more products.
Okay. All right. Well, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? It started as a sanctions issue in my mind. Now I've got a better understanding that this is about, building safety, manufacturing, Australian jobs, regional jobs. Something that's very close to my heart. I'm worried that Australian families are unwittingly buying product that's not fit for purpose, that's certainly from a conflict zone, and the Australian government's not providing any sort of framework or assurance that that's not happening.
Yes, and we've seen it's having an impact. We've already seen one of our businesses reduce from 1,200 to under 1,000 workers in the last couple of years and closed 2 mills. So, and if this continues, it's going to just escalate.
That's shocking. Chair, that's my questions. If you need to share the call a little further.
One thing though, like, do we know businesses that are importing this type of stuff?
Just reflect back on the type of import channel has changed a little bit over the last year and a half. So I think we're terming it as a bit of a pop-up importer. So there's large importers that have got a big footprint in Australia and have really good systems in place. And then there's lately over the last 2 years been an increase in these pop-up importers, and we've also said that they work through Facebook, through social media, or direct to builders. So they're the concerning area, and I can guarantee you, if you went on Facebook and asked for LVL, one of these pop-up importers will appear, and then you'll get a few more of them too over time. So
I don't know if there's any of that stuff you can give to us. I wouldn't mind having a look at it, even if it's confidentially, but I'd just be intrigued to have a look to see who is behind these businesses.
Yeah. And I have any number of brochures from Sydney Build that are Chinese importers promoting the use of larch, which is not grown in China, and also claiming FSC certification that has banned Russian fibre.
Thank you. Just a very quick question from me. The isotope testing, it sounds pretty simple, but is it an expensive thing to do?
Currently it is. It can be. So the initial spectron, the initial under a microscope's not that expensive, but the isotope, and it's about new technology and about not a huge market, if you know what I mean. But that's where I was thinking that more work to be done in that area. The good thing about those types of processes, you could do a lot You can do a lot quickly as well. So I can only see the price going down when the demand is more as well. So
25 layers in a piece of LVL, so that's 25 tests.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yep.
All right.
Because they could be 25 different trees. So.
Yep. Understood. Okay, well, thank you very much. I appreciate you appearing as witnesses today. I don't believe there are any questions on notice, but if there were, if you could please return them to the committee by Thursday, the 9th of July. Thank you very much.
can do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chair.
Thank you.
Thanks, committee.
And I now welcome representatives from the Department of Home Affairs, Australian Border Force and the Australian Federal Police. That an officer of a department of the Commonwealth or of a state shall not be asked to give opinions on matters of policy and shall be given reasonable opportunity to refer questions asked of the officer to superior officers or to a minister. This resolution does not preclude questions asking for explanations of policies or factual questions about when and how policies were adopted. If a witness objects to answering a question, they should state the ground upon which the objection is made, and the committee will determine whether it will insist on an answer having regard to the ground which is claimed. If the committee determines to insist on an answer, a witness may request that the answer be given in camera. Commonwealth officers appearing today are also reminded of the Senate order specifying the process by which a claim of public interest immunity should be raised. A copy of the order is available from the Secretariat. I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses giving evidence to the Senate committees has been provided to you. For the Hansard record, would you please state your full name and the capacity in which you appear today? And we'll start at this end of the table.
Crystal Fox. I'm the Assistant Secretary of Counter Foreign Interference Policy and Partnerships at the Department of Home Affairs.
Thank you.
Greta Doherty, First Assistant Secretary, Counter Foreign Interference, Cyber and Technology at the Department of Home Affairs.
Tarani Vathanagay from the Australian Border Force, Strategy and Border Modernisation Division.
Melissa Catania, Customs and Trade Frameworks, Australian Border Force.
Matthew Gale, Commander Special Investigations, Australian Federal Police.
Sandra Booth, Assistant Commissioner, Cyber and Special Investigations, Australian Federal Police.
Timothy Underhill, Acting Commander, Criminal Assets, Fraud and Corruption, Australian Federal Police.
Thank you very much. I now invite you to make a short opening statement, and at the conclusion we'll invite committee members to ask questions. So would anybody like to make a short opening statement?
Thank you, Chair. None of the agencies here today will make an opening statement. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Senator Ciccone.
I'll just ask a couple. Hello. Thank you for coming here. Now, you probably would have heard some of the evidence earlier. It's probably more for... I'll start off with ABF first. In terms of what we just heard, does the ABF confirm the nature of goods on import with respect to Russian timber? Like, do you test?
So, thank you, Senator. The first point I need to make is Russian timber is not subject to a sanction at this stage.
Yeah.
So in terms of the general question, and I did hear the evidence of the previous witnesses around whether or not we check for country of origin or any of those sorts of provenance questions. Of course, we look at the paperwork, as the previous witnesses were indicating, but we also use a risk-based approach in terms of understanding the provenance of what's coming through the border and make intelligence-based decisions in terms of which of those products we actually physically examine or conduct further analysis on.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So you obviously would look at whatever paperwork you have in front of you and check that it matches what's in the container? Is that the general gist of what happens
that
with
might
respect to timber?
That might be, well, certainly in terms of, I make the point again around the timber not being sanctioned at this stage. But,
no, sorry. I'm not talking about just
generally.
Russian or wherever it's come, but you look at the log that's up before you and you check to make sure that's what he said is there.
So there's quite a significant amount of product that comes across the border, Senator, as you would appreciate, and lots of reports are provided by shipping agents, importers and so on. So all of that material is analysed by the Australian Border Force and also the Department of Agriculture, Forestry, Fisheries as well. And we obviously analyse which products we need to physically examine and which we are able to clear based on the information that we have in front of us.
So in terms of the more broader, I think, Russian sanctions framework, how do you go about dealing with that in terms of what comes into Australia?
So the sanctions framework applies to a number of products that I think you've discussed as a committee before, including in relation to gold and in relation to some petroleum products. So again, it's the same process in effect, understanding what material is provided to us by the importers and through that supply chain, and then making a decision as to whether or not we need to examine it further. I will also say we would also react to any information or intelligence that's provided to us by members of the general public, and certainly some of the witnesses that appeared before, if they had information that was relevant to us, I'd encourage them to provide that information to us as well to be able to better target any activity we have.
And do you provide advice to importers on goods that may be subject then to sanctions?
There is a range of information available on both our website but also the Sanctions Office website. We engage with importers and exporters all the time, so there's a regular conversation and information channels about what the requirements of the border are.
What outreach activities do you do with partners to undertake, I guess, domestically and internationally to preserve the integrity of our sanctions framework?
I might have to take the exact outreach question on notice, Senator, but in terms of the messaging and the provision of information, that's ultimately led by the Australian Sanctions Office, and I know they're appearing before you next. And we would seek to amplify any of that messaging through our various forums, whether that's engaging directly with importers or through their peak bodies or through our facilitation committees.
Yeah. I know with the department, you mentioned in your submission about cyber sanctions. What are the cyber sanctions and what is the process for imposing them?
So, Senator, the Department of Home Affairs works closely with the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, who administers the Significant Cyber Incidents Framework under the Autonomous Sanctions Act. The Foreign Minister is able to seek advice from relevant ministers when making a decision to impose a sanction, and in this situation may seek advice from the Minister for Cyber Security. The cyber sanctions are there to impose costs on threat actors and to make their activities more difficult to play out, and they include travel bans and targeted financial restrictions. So Home Affairs has a supporting role in terms of providing advice through to DFAT in administering that sanctions regime.
Can you tell us about the sanctions already in place, the cyber sanctions?
Certainly, there are currently 12 individuals and 5 entities who are subject to sanctions. That's as at the 6th of February 2026. And those are regularly announced by the Minister for Foreign Affairs when she makes those decisions, and those decisions are published on the website. That publication is a really important tool in shining a light on the activities of these actors who seek to obviously operate behind the scenes, and so that sort of exposure is a really critical tool that the government has to disrupt these threats.
I understand the Foreign Interference Coordination Centre, I may have got that right or wrong, but it conducts outreach to a range of diaspora communities, including educational institutions and other organisations. How does this work, I guess, interact with the sanctions framework?
So thank you, Senator. In a few ways, I guess. Probably the most relevant point here is the work that education, the Department of Home Affairs, co-leads with education in the university sector. So that's the University Foreign Interference Task Force. Through that forum, which includes both the higher education sector and a range of government organisations, we're able to share information about sanctions updates, able to provide advice around how universities and researchers should take potential foreign collaborations into consideration and make sure that they're able to consider risks and comply with sanctions. So that's a regular a forum that we have to make sure we're doing outreach specifically to the higher education sector. Similarly, we have another task force called TechFit, which is targeted at small technology startups as another mechanism to bolster resilience against foreign interference, and that again is an information sharing mechanism to make sure that the organisations who are likely to be at most risk of foreign interference understand the sanctions framework and understand what risks that actors can pose before they enter into arrangements.
Thank you. With the AFP, just a few questions here. In terms of the enforcement action, what enforcement action has the AFP actually taken in regards to Russian sanctions? Have you got any particular examples or any sort of themes you might be able to share with the committee?
Yeah, so certainly, thank you, Senator. So our role is operational and enforcement focused. It's not policy or effectiveness, and the evaluation of sanctions is the responsibility of the Australian Sanctions Office with the Department of Foreign Affairs. We enforce those sanction laws under the Autonomous Sanctions Act 2011, Charter of United Nations Act and the associated regulations through criminal investigations. Some examples of that may be the issues that were just raised by my colleague around cyber sanctions, of which there are the 12 individuals and 5 entities. So we did that through, we see that they are effective through disrupting offshore offenders, limiting financial activity, travel and criminal standing. There are thematic sanctions which allow action regardless of the geographic location, knowing that cyber is very much a global environment that we work in. The ability to be able to do that regardless of geographic location, so not country specific, is very important for us. To date, the cyber sanctions which Australia has implemented have also been supported trilaterally by the United States and United Kingdom, who also issued sanctions against the individuals and entities listed by Australia, as well as additional targets. And the trilateral and multilateral sanctions enhance the effectiveness and deterrence of the sanction activity and require close coordination with our domestic and international partners. We do have instances where, through our Countering Foreign Interference Task Force, matters may have lended themselves into that space as well, and also within our crime elements too.
I ask because I understand that the AFP is involved in sanction activities, obviously involving Russians responsible for cyber attacks here in Australia. I was hoping you might be able to tell us a bit more about these actions.
With regards to the current investigations, unfortunately not in this
current
forum,
investigations,
Senator.
but you've obviously supported some actions with respect to probably dark web type sanctions and other activities. I don't know if there's anything you might be able to share with the committee to help us understand a bit more the work you're doing.
Okay.
Any significant cyber incidents against Australians or Australia?
Can I take that one on notice?
Sure.
I just want to be careful
sure.
about what's currently under investigation versus
that.
what is closed.
I wouldn't be asking what's currently under investigation, but stuff that's already out there in the domain or you may have already done. Good examples. But look, take it on notice.
Yeah,
I'm mindful of time, Chair.
Chair,
Chair, I have an answer to a question on notice that I just took then
sure.
about outreach activities. I'll be very brief.
It's not on notice until it's on notice.
So I understand that in the last 6 months we've undertaken 3 joint outreach sessions to media, research institutions and industry, and we've got a further 2 planned, and we do that with the Australian Sanctions Office and Defence Export Control.
Okay, so is that the actions that the ABF take then specifically in relation to the Russian sanctions? Okay, all right, thank you. It's one less paperwork for you to follow up on now. That's good. Well, I'm all right, Chair, unless the AFP have anything to add. Oh, they're frantic, look at their notes. But otherwise, take it on notice and come back.
Senator, I just want to be safe on that.
Sure, look, just take it on notice and come back to us with something a bit
you.
more substantive. Some examples would be great.
No problem. Thank you, Senator.
Thanks.
All right, thank you,
Thanks,
Senator.
Chair.
Thank you. We in the previous hearing, we had evidence from somebody that said that the research shows that Australia has emerged as one of the major global markets for Russian oil products. And I just wanted to get a sense of, I guess, the assessment of that, or the assessment of the risk of that from the Department of Home Affairs and Australian Border Force, particularly since we have had the disruptions in the Strait of Hormuz. We know that the purchasing of Russian crude oil has increased since then, and whether you've changed your assessment of the risk of Russian oil coming into Australia since that disruption?
Thanks, Chair. I might start with that one. The decision-making and the assessment of the risk sits with the Australian Sanctions Office. Our role in the Australian Border Force is to implement the sanctions that are in place. So obviously we work closely with them, but we don't have a view on the assessment of risk.
Okay, but so the Australian Border Force is responsible for the detecting and seizing of any goods that are related to those sanctions. So have you seen an increase in Russian crude oil making its way to Australia?
I will take the specific question on notice, Senator, but I don't believe we have. And much of this hangs on whether or not the oil has been substantially transformed or not, and I know this committee has dealt with that issue previously as well. We do have a number of investigations underway, but I'm not actually sure how many of them relate to oil, so I will take your specific question on notice.
So, because the Border Force is responsible for detecting it, and you would be aware of whether you've seen an increase in detections. So have you seen an increase or you haven't?
No, in fact, as you were speaking, I've just been informed that we haven't seen an increase over the last 2 years in terms of the Russian oil itself.
Okay. The evidence that was given to us is that, Australia is a soft target. And I have full respect for the work that you are all doing, that you commit your lives to at the moment. But that is the evidence, and there's no examples of enforcement and action. You just said that there's no increase in risk, but given what we've seen, the global disruptions, the risk is greater, surely, that Russian oil, in some form or another, is coming in from India and other third countries to Australia?
Senator, I can only repeat the evidence that I've given, which is we haven't seen an increase in Russian crude oil in Australia over the last 2 years. But we are aware of the live conversation that is happening, at least publicly, around transformed oil, including through other countries.
Okay. Can you talk through the transformed oil for us, please?
I think it's probably a question better directed to the Sanctions Office. Essentially, as you know, the Russian crude oil is sanctioned, and so that's what we're looking for effectively at the border. Where oil has been substantially transformed, essentially it isn't then identified as Russian crude oil. It's identified as a product of the country that it has been transformed in. So we know in the case of India that it would be Indian oil because it's been substantially transformed in India. So in that context, we are not in a position to take any kind of action against oil that is actually coming from India.
Do you have a definition in front of you of what substantially transformed would be? I mean, what sort of percentage are we talking here?
I don't think I have a definition of what if it's a percentage. I do know that there is guidance that has been provided by the Sanctions Office, and if that hasn't been provided to you, we can absolutely make that available on notice. It's publicly available.
Okay. But I guess what the evidence shows us is that blended, it is possible, because if you're looking for pure crude oil from Russia, you're not finding it, it's not going to come to Australia, but the loophole is that it goes to India, gets, mixed up with crude oil from other countries, and then makes its way to Australia. And so, but we're not testing for that. Is that my understanding, that we're not testing for, we're not doing the isotope testing or however else you're going to test it? That's not happening.
Senator, we are looking out for, and we're detecting Russian crude oil. Where oil has been substantially transformed in another country, we are not in a position to take any kind of enforcement action against that product.
And why is that? Why does it not matter that part of it could still be a substantial part of the oil coming into Australia? Part of it is from a sanctioned country. Why does that not matter?
This question really is better directed at my colleagues at the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, Senator. I don't have anything further to add from a Border Force perspective.
Okay. Because it's a I guess a similar question with the conflict timber is that the stuff is coming in through borders. There is that loophole. And I think it's important from our perspective that, as a government, we look to close those loopholes. I just want to change to the Russian assets and sanctioned assets. We also had evidence that previously the government had said there was around about $100 million of Russian assets in Australia. The evidence given to us at the hearing was that that could actually be more like $6.7 billion because Euroclear has said that they've got 2% of their assets held in Australian dollars. I'm just wondering if anybody here today is able to give any clarity on the Russian assets that are held in Australia or in Australian denominated currency.
Senator, I'll speak on behalf of my colleagues, but they can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think any of the officials here today would have an answer to that question. We obviously have supporting roles in terms of our support for the sanctions regime. So Home Affairs looks at visa levers that we have, as well as the cyber sanctions that we've talked through. Border Force has outlined their role, and the AFP has an investigations capacity and operations lead. So we think that would be a question better directed to the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade.
Mr Underhill, you wouldn't have anything to add to that?
No, just that we haven't to date identified any Russian assets in Australia subject to sanctions, and that would be something that we'd discuss with our partners. As the Criminal Assets and Confiscation Task Force lead, the Proceeds of Crime Act doesn't actually facilitate the freezing of sanctioned assets. It is specifically designed for proceeds of crime or instruments of an offence. So unless proceeds of crime were generated from sanctions avoidance in terms of Russian sanctions, then we don't have a facility to freeze or seize or have forfeited those assets. Okay. If they were identified, and we do have a process by which private sector and partners can refer to us, and they have historically done so, where they will report suspicions of engaging in an asset which may be subject to sanctions. And if able to, we will give advice in those circumstances, and then it would be incumbent on that individual or entity to not deal with that asset. And particularly in the case of financial institutions, they'd be required to freeze the money in an account and hold it until such time as the entity is no longer sanctioned.
Okay. And with the sanctions office, they have limited investigative capability, I guess. So they would refer that to you.
Well, we wouldn't generally investigate. We would investigate contraventions of sanctions, so sanctions breaches. But if there was an asset identified, we would provide advice in relation to it. But we wouldn't actually be responsible for freezing or seizing that asset.
Okay. So were you provided any advice, or did you provide any advice in relation to, or would you provide advice in relation to government-issued securities that then had to be sold because they had been bought initially by the Russian government, which is now sanctioned? Would you have provided advice on that?
So I'm not familiar of us being asked for any advice on that.
No.
But if we were asked, we would provide advice.
Okay.
But we would do so in coordination with our partners, particularly the Australian Sanctions Office.
Okay. Well, I mean, that is the crux of, I guess these assets that are said to be held in Australia. The $6.7 billion worth of Australian securities had to be sold. Well, they would have to be sold because through Euroclear, owned by the Russian government. And so maybe it could be a question on notice as to whether that has been something that has been given advice on. Because I guess from our perspective, we just want to understand how big this problem here is in Australia and whether we're actually really getting across it, because it's something that they've said repeatedly. Euroclear has said repeatedly, 2% of their holdings is in Australian dollars.
Yeah, we'd be happy to take that on notice.
Okay, thank you very much. DFAT has advised the committee that there's currently no recognised international mechanism for tracking Russian crude oil through third country refining systems. Sorry to just go back to this issue. But given this, what can the Australian Border Force do, or what can it actually possess to determine whether imported petroleum products contain Russian crude oil? So that of that oil that's coming in, what can you actually do to test? Let's say the government said we needed to test this oil that's coming in. What can you actually do to test it?
So I'm not in a position to explain what sort of testing mechanism might be in existence to be able to identify it. We would absolutely take the guidance of the Sanctions Office in terms of how we would be able to implement any sanction if one arose. I was also reflecting on your earlier question, Senator, around the transformation process. It's absolutely common that anything that comes into Australia is could be manufactured overseas from multiple different sources, and that applies, obviously, we're talking about timber or oil in this case, but it actually applies to any product that comes in. So to be able to verify the origins of the products that go into the things that are manufactured overseas is quite a challenge to be able to overcome, and I think we need to reflect it in that context. And it's the same in the question that you're asking. But in terms of the specific testing mechanism, which is what I think you're asking me, I'm not aware of any specific testing mechanism that would enable us to identify whether or not there was Russian crude oil in the oil products that are coming to us.
Okay. So how would you then? How do you do it then? Do you track the tankers? How do you know whether pure Russian crude oil is coming in? So what's the process of identification?
In terms of when they're coming into Australia, the declarations that are made, the details in relation to the tankers that come in, there's obviously tracking systems in terms of where these vessels have been and where they're coming from. All of that information is pulled together to identify whether or not there might be Russian crude oil on any vessels coming into Australia.
Okay. The gentleman that I've been referring to, actually, private citizen, but he tracks the tankers as well. He's got, publicly available software, and he's able to track, when that goes into India and, comes down to Australia. So I would have thought, if we had a sort of framework over that transformed crude oil and we didn't want to be putting petroleum products into our cars, etc., that, you know, came from Russia. I think, you know, obviously it seems like a pretty simple process to do.
I think, Senator, if your proposition is that you would be able to identify potentially where products have come from before they're substantially transformed, then I concede that. I think the challenge for us is when it is transformed into higher quality products from the crude oil, being able to identify that it has in fact come from Russian crude oil is something that would be a challenge. And I say that in the context of the current sanctions regime is around Russian crude oil, which is diesel and crude products, as opposed to transformed or higher quality products.
So it sounds like the sanctions framework needs a bit of reform so that it captures all of that. But, you know, we're hearing from some witnesses previously about testing wood, and, you know, it might be an expensive process to test isotopes, but they're managing to do it. Been to CSIRO as well, where they do some pretty remarkable testing of products there too. So I don't actually think it would be all that difficult to test the petroleum that's coming into Australia. We've just got to be able to do it and make sure that these products are on our sanctions list, I think, is probably the recommendation that would come out of this hearing. Anybody have anything to offer on that?
I don't have a view on that, Senator. It's really a matter for the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade and the Sanctions Office to pursue that.
Yeah, okay. Has Home Affairs received intelligence from international partners indicating the increased use of third-party countries in refining crude oil?
I'm not aware of any specific intelligence, and I'm not sure I'd necessarily be able to refer to it in this context in any event. But we absolutely work with partners around the world, including with importers, exporters and so on as well, and members of the public. I'm hoping that the gentleman you're referring to, Senator, has provided that information to us to enable us to undertake the assessments we need to consider whether or not we need to take further action.
Well, his submissions are published, I believe so. So you haven't had any intelligence specifically related to suppliers servicing Australian markets? That was...
I'm not aware of any, but I will correct that if that is incorrect.
Yeah. Okay. And has Home Affairs engaged with customs, border or maritime enforcement agencies in Malaysia, Singapore, Brunei regarding sanctions compliance?
Absolutely, Senator. We engage with all of those organisations on a whole range of issues, including issues as important as this one.
And is your team sufficiently staffed to be able to deliver, I guess, the intent of this sanctions regime?
We are staffed to be able to implement the regime that is in operation at the moment.
Okay. Okay, I think that's it from me. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time.
Senator,
Yes.
if I may, we might just come back if you could give me 1 minute just to answer Senator Ciccone quickly, and then we might be able to answer some of his question from earlier. That's all. I'll just pass to my colleague, Commander Gale.
Thank you, Senator. And apologies for the confusion a little bit earlier, but there has been actually quite some substantial operational activity that's been done jointly across our international partners that has fed into the Sanctions Office here in Australia. And if I can just give you an overview of some of the activities that have occurred in recent years, there has been both financial and travel sanctions applied against a number of Russian individuals that have been associated with a number of entities online that have been targeting Australians. Some notable incidents particularly has been the Medibank leak, where 9.7 million pieces of information were shared across the dark web. We have sanctioned or been contributed to the sanctioning of 6 individuals in relation to that. We have also looked at a company called Lockbit, which has been attributed to another Russian individual by the name of Dmitry Koroshev. He's also been subject to travel and financial sanctions. And in 2025, there was additional sanctions which we provided guidance to relating to 2 entities called Media Land and ML Cloud. They are affiliated with 2 Russian individuals, Alexandrovich Velosovic and Kirill Zatolokin. They're associated with a company called Bulletproof Hosting, which facilitates a lot of that online offending as well. There are a number of other operational matters that we may be able to provide you on notice if you like, but there certainly has been.
You just mentioned to do with dark web.
Sorry?
To do with the dark web. Any of those specifically relate to the dark web services?
There may be, but if you're allowed to provide you on notice,
take it on
a bit of a comprehensive overview.
Thank you, appreciate that.
Thank you.
Senator, if I could just add to that, that comes from the good work of ASD along with the AFP through Operation Aquila.
Thank you very much for that. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, and thank you for appearing as witnesses today. And if you took any questions on notice, we would appreciate it if you return them to the committee by the 9th of July, Thursday. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
And now welcome representatives from the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. $7:15. I forgot. 7:15 flight. 7:15. Yeah, well, I can't find my questions, so I can do it faster. Do you want some wine? I'll probably have them here. I have the briefings back here. Thank you. So, Rightio. I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses giving evidence to the Senate committees has been provided to you. With the Hansard record, would you please state your full name and the capacity in which you appear today? Mr. Chandler.
My name is Guy Chandler. I'm Acting Director Russia in DFAT. Thank you.
Christian Hurst, First Assistant Secretary, Europe Division, Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade.
Thank you. Julie Heckscher, First Assistant Secretary, Legal and Regulatory Policy Division.
Michael Gugan, I'm the Director of the Sanctions, Listings and Litigation Section.
Thank you very much. Would you like to make an opening statement today?
Yes, I would, Senator. Thank you. So thanks for providing me the opportunity to speak today. Since I last appeared before this committee on the 18th of February, Russia has continued its unjustified and unprovoked aggression against Ukraine. Just last week, on the 15th of June, Russia launched a new wave of strikes across Ukraine. These strikes killed at least 11 people, injured dozens of civilians, and damaged the UNESCO-listed Cherprysk Labur site in Kyiv, one of Ukraine's most sacred cultural sites. These strikes have been compounded by consistent and credible reports of widespread human rights violations and breaches of international law, including attacks against civilians, arbitrary detention, torture, and the forcible transfer and deportation of Ukrainian children, one of the most reprehensible aspects of Russia's invasion. More than 4 years on, Australia remains committed to supporting Ukraine and imposing costs on Russia. On the 19th of June, the government announced a further $100 million Australian dollars of support through the prioritised Ukraine requirements list, which is a NATO mechanism to provide critical military equipment to Ukraine, which brings Australia's support to Ukraine to over 1.8 billion Australian dollars. On the 12th of May, this year, the Australian government also announced that it would continue support to Ukraine's sovereignty and economic prosperity by extending Ukraine's duty-free access to Australia for a further 2 years until July 2028. Together with partners in Europe and the US and our own region, Australia's sanctions remain critical to constraining Russia's military capability and punishing individuals that are associated with Russia's war machine. Since DFAT's last appearance at this committee, Australia's imposed its largest sanctions package on Russia ever, listing an additional 180 individuals, entities and shadow fleet vessels with links to Russia's war. That brings our total sanctions to 1,800. Despite the global fuel supply disruptions, Australia's approach has not changed. As I outlined during my last appearance in February, Australia has banned the direct importation of Russian oil, engaged with industry representatives to discuss options to eliminate substantially transformed Russian oil from Australian supply chains, and coordinated closely with Ukraine and international partners, including through the Coalition of the Willing, to impose sanctions. Contrary to Vladimir Putin's narrative, sanctions are working, that they are having a real effect. They are clearly shutting Russia out from international markets. Western export restrictions and financial market sanctions have made it impossible for Russian companies to import certain items directly. They've raised transportation costs, forced consumers to accept lower quality substitutes, and made it more costly for Putin to procure items for his war machine. Russia's shadow fleet operations are routinely disrupted. Companies and universities around the world have cut ties with Russian businesses and universities, isolating Russia ever more. The UK government estimates that Western sanctions have deprived the Russian state of 629 billion Australian dollars since February 2022, the equivalent of 2 more years of funding for the invasion. The Russian economy is faltering with capacity pressures, slowing GDP growth and persistent inflation. In May 2026, Russia slashed its growth forecast from 1.3% to 0.4%. In April 2026, Russia's annual inflation was at 5.6%, significantly higher than its inflation target of 4%. Australia remains steadfast in its support for Ukraine in defending itself against Russian aggression. Thank you very much.
I'll pass the call to Senator Ciccone.
I'll be very quick. I know we've got some very limited time. Can you just expand a little bit on what you've just said about how Australian and like-minded sanctions have negatively impacted Russia's economy?
Yes, thank you, Senator. As I said, the sanctions are really biting and having a profound effect on Russia's economy. Further examples of this is a UK government estimate that since 2000, we now see that Russia's exports of oil and gas have reached their lowest point since 2020. So that's another example of the impact. Sanctions and departing Western firms have hindered Russia's ability to repair its oil refineries as well. As you know, Ukraine have been hitting Russian oil refineries, so the sanctions have really limited their capacity to repair those. And we know that 40% of Russian crude export capacity was offline as a result of requiring repairs in April. So there's manifold impacts of the sanctions regime.
I've seen, as you probably have, recent media articles regarding the importation of timber to Australia. Hoping you might be able to talk us through the strategic focus of Australia's sanctions regime on Russia, and like what our sanctions are focused on and why. And I don't know if you had any commentary around timber. I mean, I know it's not a sanctioned good, but I don't know if there's anything that you wanted to share with us tonight.
Do you want to do the strategic focus? Or
it's really your question.
Sure.
I can actually jump in afterwards.
Yeah, sure. So the strategic focus of our sanctions regime is really to have a direct impact on Russia's ability to target Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty, and to punish Russia for its clear violations of international law. We work really closely with like-minded partners, so it's very much focused on the war machine and those individuals we know who've been involved with supporting the war machine and are also involved with human rights violations and breaches of international law. So that's the overall strategic focus. I don't know if you want to add more on.
No, it might be just helpful to add that we work very closely with like-minded partners. Ever since 2022 and the invasion of Ukraine, there has been a really broad, like-minded effort to try and identify what are the sectors that can be targeted, what will be impactful, and what we can do. And that coordination and information flow continues to happen. That is not to say that we manage to impact everything all the time. I would have to say that, as you would all be aware, Russia works quite hard to avoid sanctions. It's not always easy to pick up the avoidance. So just as you impose sanctions, of course there is activity to try and avoid them. There was mention earlier of the shadow fleet. That's one of the ways that Russia and others, frankly, have sought to avoid it. But I think, adding to Dr. Hurst's point, this is a process in which we work very closely with partners, particularly Europeans, who of course are closer to the action. Their relationship with Russia was much stronger, covered more sectors. The trade volumes were larger right at the outset of this. The Australian volume of trade, the relationship was already pretty low at that point. So really, just to add, this is not just an Australian approach, but a whole of like-minded approach as well.
And then, Senator, on Russian timber, we explained the kind of focus, the strategic focus of the sanctions regime. Russian timber and articles of Russian timber are not covered by the sanctions regime, but they are covered by a blanket 35% tariff we have put on the direct import of Russian goods to have an impact on the Russian economy. So there's the two separate things, the kind of targeted sanctions regime around the war machine, individuals associated with human rights violations, breaches of international law, in the enabling sectors of the Russian war machine, and working closely with like-minded, and then the 35% tariff, of which Russian timber directly imported into Australia would be subject to.
There's also been commentary on Russia, I guess, competing in the water polo competition. I have no idea about this other than what I've seen in the media. I'm not a water polo type of a guy, but I understand there's been some interest by the media around a water polo competition in Australia next month. I was hoping you might also be able to talk us through that and what the government's position is.
Yes, you're right, Senator. There is the Women's Water Polo World Cup is due to be held in Australia later in July. Unfortunately, the World Aquatics Body made a decision earlier this year to allow Russian and Belarusian athletes to compete under their national flags. While the Australian government respects the independence and autonomy of international sporting federations, the government's view has been very clear and expressed publicly on multiple occasions that we think the International Olympic Committee stance, which is to ensure no Russian or Belarusian state representative in their sports, is the right position, and that is the position that we hold. So we think the World Aquatics Body's made the wrong call on this one.
Is it normal for them to consult DFAT, or at least have a chat to someone within government?
This is the Office for Sports is the office that is the primary interface with international sporting bodies, but we work closely with them on and they express through their mechanisms our position on these matters, which continues to be that Russia should be excluded.
I mean, now that the government's position is known, have they decided to review, or was it too late?
The World Aquatics Body, no sign they're reviewing their position.
Yeah. All right, thanks. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. I think it's been pretty well established that Russia's making extraordinary profit out of the Iran-United States conflict. And we heard evidence before, I guess, of the loophole of blending Russian crude oil with other oils through third countries, and then we have no idea how much of that is actually getting into Australia, and therefore how much of the sales of petroleum and oil here in Australia is contributing to the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. I guess my question would be, have you given the movement of events over the past few months, have you given any advice to government, or have you made any risk assessment, I guess, over the increase of transshipment or what was the refined blended petroleum coming from Russia into Australia? Has that risk increased over the past few months? Have you given that advice? Have you done that assessment? Have you done the analysis?
So, Senator, it's quite interesting. Over the last few months, Ukraine has increasingly targeted Russian oil refineries with success, which has significantly curtailed Russia's ability to take advantage of changed global energy market conditions. And I mentioned in my earlier evidence the effect that our sanctions regime has had on preventing Russia from being able to undertake repairs to oil refineries, not being able to get access to the expertise and resources required. As a result of Ukrainian military strategy, astute Ukrainian military strategy, Russia has really not been able to take significant advantage of changed global market conditions.
That is, I mean, we've got ABC News reporting, I think that, let me just bring it up. ABC News reporting that for every barrel, the Russian budget receives an additional $1.6 billion for every month that the Brent crude oil prices trades at $10 higher than the February 26 baseline. And it just seems extraordinary that your evidence is saying that they're not profiting from.
Certainly, prices have gone up, but their capacity to increase refining has been reduced by Ukrainian military strategy since February this year. Ukraine shifted strategy through long-range drone strikes to hit Russian oil refineries, which has really disrupted their capacity to take advantage of changed global energy conditions.
But is your assessment still that Russia is selling crude oil to countries like India at the levels that they were before, or is it that they haven't increased but they're still selling at the same level?
They continue to export oil and gas to customers. That's yes.
Okay, and I guess to my original question is, have you done a risk assessment of how much of that is coming into Australia as a blended product?
Yeah, we try to get the numbers are very difficult and unreliable. We can make estimates, and I've seen estimates in the public domain, but because it really is an estimate based on the volume of direct exports to a particular destination, and then how much is being refined in that location, and how much we're importing. So it's a guess, yep. So we don't have really reliable data on that.
And given, I guess, I would assume it's in the national interest. I mean, we're sanctioning pure crude oil. It would be in our national interest to know how much is actually coming into Australia if we really believed in that sanctions policy that we're implementing. And so why do we not have a testing mechanism to see how much is coming in? I would have thought, you've got these tankers coming in, the risk is high that it's coming into Australia. We can follow the tankers, we can follow, the process of it. So why don't we have that testing mechanism to better understand?
So Senator, the first point to make is that we think the sanctions regime we have in place and the costs we're imposing on Russia are having a real effect. As I said in my opening remarks, we've continued to see an impact on the Russian economy. So I think that the efforts we are taking to put pressure on the Russian economy are having a real effect. Second point, on substantially transformed Russian oil, we really don't want to see Russia benefit either from the changed energy conditions as a result of the conflict in the Middle East, or through being able to find other mechanisms. We are also conscious of fuel security matters, cost of living matters, as we can kind of consider these questions. So trying to come up with a scientific method to determine the precise origin is really challenging, and I think that would be a really time-consuming mechanism. We do think that industry has a bit of a role to play here. They should have a real sense of how their supply chains are being used. And I think that's why we are talking to industry regularly to say there's a community expectation here, and I think they have a really important role to play on this as well.
Okay, I think I mentioned before that I went down to see the good folk at CSIRO, and they're doing some pretty amazing testing on genome, I think it is. I'm no scientist, but the technology is there. They can test next to anything. Again, I would make the point that if it's in the national interest, I think, and if we are willing, we are able to do it. On that point of, I guess putting a bit of responsibility on industry. When the Prime Minister went to Malaysia, Singapore, Brunei, was there any advice given to him, I guess, about the potential for some of the fuel that he was trying to get for Australia being blended with Russian oil?
I'm not aware of. I can take that on notice and have a look at that for you. Yeah.
That would be terrific. Thank you very much. And I guess following on from that is whether there was any advice given to the Prime Minister on Russian origin crude oil moving through regional refining and trading hubs. So I guess that's not just related to those countries, but across the region. Just on, I guess I know supply chains are really difficult, and a lot of countries are under a lot of pressure, I guess, from the tariffs and supply chains and trying to prove all of that. But let's say, for instance, industry said to you, well, we're getting oil from a particular country, and they say it's like, what are you seeking any kind of assurance? How do you determine that the oil that industry is bringing in here has not actually come from Russia? Do they give you a certificate? What's the process?
You mean on the direct import of Russian oil? How are we certain that that industry are not?
Yeah, I mean, you just mentioned. I'm going to wrap up after this, but I just want to understand. You mentioned that industry should take responsibility, and you're sort of asking them to let you know if I guess there's intelligence is one thing, there's pushing back is the other, but is a lot of this done in good faith? Do you get we're talking before about timber, whether there's they sort of rely on certificates that I guess can be drawn up by anybody. So what's the process that you go through with all this?
Perhaps I can just jump in with some advice. I know you had ABF here and AFP before.
Yep.
Obviously, DFAT is an agency that works on the sanctions specifically and the foreign policy sitting behind that, but we work closely with partners across national security and operational agencies like the AFP, ABF, Home Affairs. And of course, ABF is the one that is responsible for managing Australia's customs, imports and exports, and they are a partner of ours in relation to enforcing sanctions controls, which they're very well across as well. So I think that's actually a question for them. Clearly, anyone coming into Australia would have to meet ABF requirements in relation to whether it be bills of lading, and I'm not an expert, by the way, on import certification of these things, but there would be bills of lading, certificates of origin, all of those sorts of things that would presumably be part of ABF's requirements, but this is the details of how they actually check and what the certificates look like is really one for ABF.
Yeah, I fully appreciate that, but I think this Well, it sort of comes down to, evidence that somebody had given at the previous hearing is that there's no sort of real clear, I guess, who's responsible for this stuff, because we heard just before they were saying, we'll ask the Sanctions Office. So,
well, I think it's a difference between substantially transformed, potentially Russian-sourced oil, which doesn't actually breach sanctions currently. It's not a breach of sanctions. And direct Russian imports, which is. But it would be border checks and the normal customs control certifications that would be the place to actually look at that. I am comfortable that I am not an expert in this, but I'm happy to for us to take on some work with ABF on what the answers are. But it's actually border control, customs control, those sorts of things, which would be where those kind of checks were made.
And I think from memory of the evidence was that they primarily do it through tracking. They don't actually have testing that they can do of the oil that's coming in. I think it's just basically on tracking of the ships. Seems like a pretty imperfect measure. I mean, these aren't questions of, like, we want to understand how we can do this better, because we don't want to be contributing to Russia's budget, and we want to be able to have a report that actually gives some significant policy recommendations, and want to be able to tighten these loopholes. And I think we need better technology. We need the technology to test the stuff that's coming in. We need sanctions framework that actually covers blended fuels that are coming in, because goodness knows we could have 75% Russian oil coming in a barrel and we wouldn't even know. Look, I appreciate your time. I appreciate the complexity.
I wish I could help.
Of all these. I know it is a really big problem to grapple with, and also, to the point before about nobody can really give me a clear answer of the total of Russian assets that are actually here in Australia. We've got conflicting evidence on that. We don't really. I mean, you've just increased the sanctions to 1,800 entities, but we haven't really.
Well, perhaps, Senator, I can jump in on the frozen assets, because I'm not sure there has been conflicting. I don't know what you've heard earlier, actually, but I'm not sure that there is conflicting information. But it's probably helpful to actually step out where the obligation lies in relation to freezing and identification of assets. And of course, as you know very well, there is no power under sanctions legislation actually to seize assets at all. So essentially, and that is consistent, by the way. I know that often it's misunderstood, but as far as I know, no country has yet implemented a seizing regime, actually. Mm-hmm. Because it does actually cut across, I mean, here in Australia, it cuts across constitutional issues. But for countries overseas as well, and I include the EU, which has been looking at this for some time, I include the UK, I include Canada, and previously the US. Particularly when you're talking about Russian sovereign assets, you start running into complexity of whether in fact you can seize sovereign Russian assets without breaching international law. And there's been a lot of work done. And clearly the fact that no one has yet actually done it suggests to you that this is really complex and very difficult. What the Europeans have actually done is they have a very large volume of Central Bank of Russia money, essentially invested through Euroclear in Brussels. And it is frozen under EU sanctions. And it is incurring interest, and they have been using basically the interest on frozen assets have been used to essentially guarantee or repay or support loans that have been made to Ukraine. So no one's actually seized assets. The assets are still there. And no one else has a regime which enables them to seize sovereign assets. Just to clarify that, if anyone suggested that anyone has succeeded in doing it, no one has actually done it yet.
Yeah, I haven't heard that.
Yeah, and we will actually have, in addition to those existing issues, we will actually have quite complex constitutional issues to work through as well as the fact we don't actually have powers in our sanctions legislation to seize. There are some proceeds of crime provisions in Australia that, where they're applicable, enable some seizure of some assets, but they're not in the sanctions legislation. So essentially what the sanctions legislation requires is that anyone who is holding or controlling an asset that belongs to someone that is listed, or an entity that is listed, has an obligation to basically not deal with that asset, essentially to freeze it. Individuals who are holding assets of sanctioned individuals or entities need to notify the AFP. But in fact, since we got some resources to do further monitoring and compliance, we had an NPP in 24-25 to give us some funds to actually assist us in starting to step up our monitoring and compliance work. We have also been doing quite a lot of outreach, for example, to the financial sector, to actually make sure that assets that are, significant assets that are actually held, for example, in financial accounts, etc., have in fact been frozen and identified. And we do work closely with them. We've put out guidance notes, for example, to help individuals and entities understand what their obligations are in relation to freezing assets. On the basis of notifications to us and searches that we have been able to complete, we have identified less than $100 million worth of variety of assets, sovereign and non-sovereign, within Australia. Now, monies aren't necessarily held in any interest-bearing accounts, so we don't have the kind of volumes or the situation that Europeans have. Partly this is reflecting the state of the relationship with Russia at the time that Russia invaded. Our relationship post Crimea, for example, our relationship was already very low. The trade volumes were very low. The level of assets of anyone in Australia that was going to be or had been listed was very low. So what we actually hold is pretty small. It's far less than that, in fact. We have consistently actually used that kind of advice. It is, we work very hard to make sure everyone is aware of their obligations to freeze, and we've, as I say, issued guidance notes. We do a lot of outreach, including with the financial sector, to ensure that that is continuing to be known. We do a lot of outreach in partnership with other agencies, right throughout different sectors, to try and ensure that we actually cover the ground and everyone knows what their obligations are. So,
just very quickly, on that issue of seizing and freezing, I've heard anecdotally that there's a whole bunch of houses. I think I may have asked this in the last hearing, but a whole bunch of houses in Gold Coast that are owned by Russians, and whether they're sanctioned people, I don't know. But how do you? What do you do about? Let's say you've got a sanctioned person, entity that owns a house. Does that just stay empty because you can't seize it, or what happens to it?
Well, it is actually one of those issues about assets, and I don't have any information I can share with you about real estate, for example. But
would you be able to, like, if you have any information on sanctioned individuals that own houses and the numbers of those in Australia?
I don't have any information. We can certainly take it on notice. But, but the sanctions legislation is to freeze. That's it. So there's no seizure, but you have raised a very complex question, which is about, okay, if it's frozen, it's easy in some ways. If it's money, it sits in a bank account. But who then pays rates, taxes, maintenance, etc., if it is simply frozen? One of the complexities, if we were able to seize, would in fact be exactly that. And a country overseas did have or has some legislation which enables them to seize private assets, not money, I don't think, but they have ended up, one, in litigation for quite some time, and two, with the obligation to maintain very, very expensive, difficult maintenance of a hard asset. So this is not problem-free. We're beefing up strengthening our monitoring compliance, working closely with Austrac across the whole of this front to attract funds, and it is continuing to be a work in progress is how I'd explain it.
Understood. Thank you. And my very final question, I guess you raised the EU sanctions regime before. Have the Ukrainians approached or advocated DFAT about coming into line, aligning with the EU sanctions regime on transformed oil? Because I believe that they have.
Thanks, Senator. Yes, the Ukrainians have been in touch with us on substantially transformed Russian oil through their mission here. We're aware of their position, and as I said in my opening statement, this is something we're looking very closely at. We've been consulting with industry, talking to the EU about how they're implementing their approach. So yeah, I think now that it's something we'll continue to work very closely on, and I look forward to your report as well as we think about next steps.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your time tonight on a Thursday night and appearing as witnesses. That concludes today's hearing, and if any questions on notice could be returned to the committee by Thursday the 9th of July. Thank you very much. And thank you to the witnesses who appeared, and to Hansard and Broadcasting for their assistance. The committee stands adjourned.